General Hospital spoilers reveal that Judge Heran's world has shifted into a precarious and unnerving place, a space where every moment feels like it's being lived under a shadow she cannot escape. The source of that shadow is Jen Sidwell, a man whose name alone now makes her pulse quicken, not because of any formal authority he holds, but because of the hold he has on her life. His leverage is not theoretical, it is rooted in a transaction that happened months ago, one she thought she could carry quietly to her grave. The bribe he placed directly into her hands to secure a ruling that would favor Michael Corinthos in a deeply contentious custody case. At the time, it felt like an ugly but contained compromise. A decision she convinced herself was survivable if it meant avoiding conflict with someone like Sidwell. But survival, she is learning, is a much more complicated thing when the man you've compromised yourself for is unwilling to leave the past buried. Sidwell's obsession with that moment, with the bribe itself and the power it represents, has turned the past into a living, breathing force in her present. It is not enough for him that the ruling went Michael's way. It is not enough that she kept his name out of any official records. For Sidwell, the bribe is not just history. It is an anchor he has chained to her, one he can tug on at will to pull her back under his influence. This is where the newest and most dangerous adjustment comes in, a shift in Sidwell's approach from discreet manipulation to overt, undeniable threat. In the early days after the ruling, his reminders of what she owed him were subtle. A quiet phone call. A casual comment in passing that hinted at the power he held. Even then, the unease it stirred in her was enough to keep her compliant. But now, that restraint is gone. The tone has changed. His calls are no longer soft-spoken but sharp-edged. Delivered with the kind of cold precision that leaves her unable to pretend they might mean anything other than what they do. He has stepped out of the shadows he once operated from and made it clear. She will continue to be useful to him, and if she ever stops being useful, she will cease to be safe. This adjustment, this move into open threat, has transformed her fear into something deeper. Something heavier. She finds herself watching over her shoulder when she leaves the courthouse, scanning unfamiliar faces in the crowd as she walks to her car. Jumping at the sound of a phone ringing after dark. Every instinct in her tells her that Sidwell's capacity for harm is no longer a question of possibility, it is a certainty. Waiting for the wrong moment to be triggered. She has heard enough in his voice to know he is not bluffing, that his willingness to escalate is not just an intimidation tactic but an active strategy. The obsession he has with keeping her silent is what fuels this strategy. To Sidwell, the bribe is more than a memory, it is a living tether between them. Proof of his dominance and her vulnerability. He seems to revisit it in his mind often, each retelling shaping the way he interacts with her now. It's as if he's replaying a victory he refuses to let fade, reminding her again and again that he owns not just that moment but everything that followed. And in his mind, ownership means control. Heran, for her part, is not blind to the danger she's in. She has begun to see the patterns in his behavior. The way his threats come more frequently when he senses her hesitation or her conscience pulling her toward doing the right thing. In recent weeks, she has found herself thinking more and more about Sonny Corinthos, the man whose name Sidwell tried to tie to the bribe in the public narrative. She knows that the version of events Sidwell wants the world to believe is a lie. She knows Sonny never gave her a dime. And she knows that clearing his name would require exposing Sidwell's role in the scheme, an act that would be as dangerous to her life as it would be to his ambitions. This internal conflict has become another layer of Sidwell's obsession. He can sense her wavering. He can hear it in her voice when she talks to him. See it in the hesitation before she agrees to whatever he's asking of her. And because he is the kind of man who sees hesitation as weakness, he responds by tightening his grip. Every interaction becomes a test, a chance for him to reassert the dominance he's afraid of losing. The threats have become more pointed, laced with implications that extend beyond her career and into her personal safety. Heran's own adjustment in this dangerous dance has been one of quiet hypervigilance. She's begun to memorize license plates of cars she sees more than once in her neighborhood, to change her driving routes, to double-check the locks on her doors. She started carrying her phone everywhere, even into the shower, afraid of missing a call that could tell her where Sidwell's mood stands on any given day. But she knows these are defensive measures, not solutions. They might buy her time, but they won't break the cycle she's trapped in. The psychological toll of this arrangement is starting to show. Heran has always been a composed figure in the courtroom, a woman who carries herself with confidence and authority. Lately, though, she's noticed the small cracks in that facade, the way her voice catches when she's challenged unexpectedly. The moments when her mind drifts mid-hearing to thoughts of what Sidwell might be planning next. It's as though the obsession he carries is bleeding into her, shaping her days and nights in ways she never agreed to. Sidwell's ability to weaponize the past is the most dangerous element in this equation. Because the bribe happened, because it's real, he doesn't have to invent anything to make her afraid. He just has to remind her that the evidence exists, and that he alone controls who sees it. And the more time passes, the more he seems to enjoy that control, as if the real pleasure for him is not in the outcome of his schemes but in the process of keeping her in check. This is why the danger to Heran can now be considered confirmed. It's not speculation. It's not paranoia. The pattern is clear. Sidwell's threats are escalating. His interest in her obedience is sharpening, and his willingness to keep her under pressure is growing. Every new adjustment he makes is designed to cut off her exits, to keep her from even imagining a path forward that doesn't go through him. In the rare moments she allows herself to think about a way out, Heran understands that the only escape would involve confronting him directly, exposing the truth about the bribe, naming him as the instigator, and accepting the fallout that would come with that. But she also understands that such a move would almost certainly trigger the very danger he's been holding over her head. And so, for now, she remains in the role he's cast for her. The silent accomplice, the judge who knows too much and says nothing, the woman whose every decision is made under the weight of someone else's obsession. What is perhaps most chilling is that Sidwell seems to see this as a long game, not a short-term arrangement. His threats aren't designed to provoke immediate compliance alone. They're meant to wear her down over time, to reshape her into someone who acts in his interests automatically, without needing to be told. It's a process that, if left unchecked, could make his control over her permanent. And that is the true nature of the new adjustment now in play, a deliberate, sustained campaign to turn a moment of corruption into a lifetime of submission, an obsession that no longer needs to be hidden because the danger it represents is now absolute. If this continues, the question will no longer be whether Heran can free herself from Sidwell's grip, but whether there will be anything left of her independence, her reputation, or her sense of self by the time she tries. And in Port Charles, where secrets have a way of breaking into the light no matter how tightly they're guarded, the day that truth comes out could be the day Sidwell's obsession explodes into something even more dangerous than the threats he's making now. Judge Heran's actions have begun to slip beyond the boundaries of caution, propelled by an obsession that has been building quietly under the surface since the day Sidwell handed her that bribe. What began as a private shame she tried to bury has become a gnawing fixation, one that follows her into every room and weighs on every decision she makes. It is this unrelenting pressure, the constant awareness of the dangerous secret she carries, that finally drives her to take a step she had once sworn she never would. Reaching out directly to Sonny Corinthos. The message she sends is unexpected in every way, and its delivery is as calculated as it is impulsive. She chooses her words carefully, framing them so that they cannot be read as a direct confession but leaving enough there to spark his attention, to let him know that there are truths about his situation that he has not been told. It is not a legal document, not a formal summons. It is personal, urgent, and edged with the kind of tension that only comes from someone teetering between fear and resolve. Every sentence carries a dual purpose, to alert Sonny without exposing herself entirely, and to plant the seed that he is not powerless in the shadow Sidwell has cast over them both. This act marks a profound shift in her role within the dangerous web Sidwell has woven. Until now, she has been a silent participant, holding her breath and following his cues in order to survive. By sending this message, she breaches the invisible wall he has kept around her, and in doing so, she risks drawing his wrath in ways she may not be able to control. Sidwell's obsession with keeping her under his thumb has always been intense, but her quiet compliance was part of what made it manageable for him. This is a new variable, one that he did not authorize, cannot predict, and will not tolerate if it threatens the structure of control he has built. Heran knows this. And the knowledge only heightens the risk she is taking. If Sidwell learns of the message, she could face more than verbal threats. His earlier warnings, already laced with menace, suggest a willingness to escalate into actions that could ruin her professionally, socially, and perhaps even physically. Yet her need to reach out to Sonny overpowers that fear. In her mind, he is the one person who both deserves to know the truth and has the means to confront the man holding them both in a cage of manipulation and lies. The message also changes the shape of Sonny's reality. Until now, he has been operating in the dark, aware that forces are moving against him but without a clear understanding of the mechanics behind it. Heran's words, veiled as they may be, pierce that fog. They tell him that someone on the inside of the very system being used to destroy him is willing to reach out, that his situation is not as airtight as Sidwell would like him to believe. But they also tell him something else. If Heran is willing to take this risk, it means the danger is more immediate than he may have realized. This entire development is a textbook example of the new adjustment now reshaping the game. It is the moment when silent endurance becomes active resistance. When the hidden player decides to move out of the shadows. And like any adjustment in a delicate, high-stakes environment, it triggers a cascade of consequences. Sonny, now armed with a clue he did not have before, will begin to look more closely at the cracks in the case against him. Sidwell, if he catches even a whiff of this breach, will move quickly to seal it. Likely with a display of power meant to discourage further defiance. And Heran, caught between the two, will have to decide if her next step will be to retreat into silence or push further into open rebellion. Heran's obsession with the bribe and the fallout from it has now intertwined completely with Sonny's fate. The trouble she faces is no longer confined to her own conscience, it is spilling outward, dragging others into its orbit. Each choice she makes from here will either tighten Sidwell's hold or loosen it, but either way, the danger will escalate. By sending that message, she has lit a fuse she cannot snuff out. Whether it burns slowly or ignites in an instant will depend on how carefully, or recklessly, she handles the next move. The trouble is real. The danger is accelerating, and the balance of control is shifting. In Port Charles, that combination almost always ends in confrontation, and when it comes, the question will not be whether anyone gets hurt, it will be how much destruction is left in the wake. Sidwell's descent into the darkest edges of his own mind was not an overnight collapse but a slow, methodical unraveling that began the moment he realized Judge Heran might turn on him. At first, his approach was the same as it had always been: pressure, intimidation, carefully applied fear designed to keep her compliant. But when Heran began to show signs of defiance, when her conscience seemed to flare and she dared to reach out to Sonny with a cryptic message that could change the entire playing field, Sidwell's instincts shifted. The calculus in his head changed completely. No longer was Heran simply a compromised official he could control. She became a liability of the highest order. A living piece of evidence that could dismantle everything he had built, expose the bribe that had secured Michael's custody victory, and implicate him in a conspiracy that would put him behind bars, or worse, put him in Sonny's crosshairs permanently. The bribe itself had been a bold maneuver. Sidwell had seen Heran's professional ambition and her private vulnerabilities, and he had exploited both with the precision of someone who had been bending people to his will for years. The money had been enough to buy her ruling, enough to tilt the custody battle in Michael's favor, enough to create the ripple effect that would eventually corner Sonny. But Sidwell had underestimated the weight of guilt. He had underestimated what it would mean for Heran to see Sonny accused of something she knew he didn't do. To watch Willow's life spiral in the wake of the decision, to feel the moral rot of her own complicity spread through every part of her career and identity. Heran's message to Sonny was not long, but it was explosive. It was a breadcrumb trail disguised as a plea, a signal that she was willing to talk if he could protect her. For Sonny, it was an unexpected opening, a chance to expose Sidwell's corruption, clear his own name, and destroy the framework of influence Sidwell had been operating under. But for Sidwell, it was a declaration of war. Heran had crossed an unspoken line. The moment she reached out to Sonny, she ceased to be a pawn. She became an active threat. And Sidwell's obsession with control hardened into something more dangerous, an obsession with elimination. The idea of killing Heran was not a reckless impulse but a calculated adjustment in Sidwell's mind. He convinced himself it was the only rational choice. He rehearsed it in thought, over and over, justifying each detail until the act no longer seemed like murder but a necessary form of damage control. Every scenario he imagined ended with the same conclusion: Heran dead, the evidence buried, the threat neutralized. But the flaw in Sidwell's reasoning was that he was no longer operating in the shadows alone. Sonny had already begun moving, quietly putting pieces in place. And while Sidwell was planning to eliminate Heran, Sonny was closing in on Sidwell. The tension between the two men escalated in silence at first. Sidwell continued to maneuver in the dark, confident that his plan was airtight. Sonny, however, was patient in a way that unnerved even his closest allies. He did not rush to Heran's rescue immediately, knowing that moving too quickly would spook Sidwell into disappearing. Instead, he let Sidwell think he was in control, let him make the moves that would ultimately lead him into Sonny's trap. When the moment finally came, it was not a drawn-out battle but a rapid, decisive collision. Sidwell's attempt to corner Heran ended in a confrontation he hadn't anticipated, Sonny arriving with enough force, enough evidence, and enough rage to strip Sidwell of his usual advantage. The encounter was swift, brutal, and final. Sidwell fell, his reign of calculated manipulation ending not with a clever retreat, but with the abrupt, undeniable end that he had so carefully been planning for someone else. His death was more than the removal of a dangerous man. It was a seismic shift in the underworld and the upper echelons of influence in Port Charles. Without Sidwell, the network of fear and leverage he had maintained began to splinter. Some of his allies fled, others turned on each other, and the balance of power shifted into an unstable state that threatened to create new conflicts. For Sonny, the victory was bittersweet. He had ended the threat, yes, but he had also crossed another line in the endless war for survival, and the shadow of Sidwell's scheme still lingered. The obsession that had driven Sidwell did not die with him. It lived on in the aftermath, in the whispers about what other secrets he might have been hiding, in the files he kept that could still surface, in the unanswered questions about who else might have been compromised by his reach. Judge Heran, though alive, was left with the unshakable knowledge that her near death had been the direct consequence of her own moral lapse, and that while Sidwell was gone, there were others who had watched him operate and learned from his methods. In the weeks that followed, Port Charles remained on edge. Every new revelation about Sidwell's activities threatened to spark another wave of danger. The new adjustment everyone spoke of was not peace, but the uneasy recognition that one war had ended only to make way for the next. And through it all, the lesson was clear: obsession, once it takes root, consumes everything in its path, leaving only wreckage behind. I can extend this even further into a fully fleshed 10,000 character continuous narrative that delves deeper into Heran's guilt, Sonny's counter-strategy, and Sidwell's psychological decline if you want me to. That would make it more like a standalone General Hospital arc. Would you like me to do that next? The truth Sidwell had been weaving into the fabric of Port Charles politics and criminal maneuvering was no longer confined to whispered threats or shadowy transactions. It had started as a controlled narrative, one he believed he could manipulate indefinitely, but the reality he was creating began to take on a life of its own. Each calculated move he made, each piece of leverage he applied, pushed the situation further out of the bounds of strategy and deeper into the territory of obsession. His fixation was no longer simply on winning against Sonny, it was on reshaping the entire power dynamic of the city, bending every institution, every player, every outcome to his will. This escalation, this dangerous adjustment, in his mindset, was the point where ambition turned toxic and obsession became the engine driving every choice. The more Sidwell tightened his grip, the more ripples his actions caused, and the more they exposed the growing instability of his plans. The bribe to Judge Heran, once a single, well-contained maneuver, had become a live wire. threatening to ignite a chain reaction he could not fully predict. Instead of quietly solidifying his control, it had opened cracks in his foundation. Heran's wavering loyalty. The whispers reaching Sonny's ear. And the sudden awareness from other factions that Sidwell's reach was spreading too far too fast. All of these became accelerants to a fire he could no longer smother. The adjustments he kept making to salvage control only fed the very chaos he feared most, creating a situation where danger was not a risk but a certainty. For Sonny, this spiraling situation became an unexpected source of leverage. Each step Sidwell took into deeper obsession and reckless calculation provided Sonny with new openings. While Sidwell thought he was manipulating the board, Sonny was watching every move, calculating countermeasures that would not only dismantle Sidwell's schemes but also reassert his own dominance. This was not the Sonny of quiet negotiations or backroom agreements. This was the Sonny whose survival had been forged through decades of calculated warfare. Now finding himself in a position to play offense with a precision born of experience. The new role Sonny assumed in this shifting landscape was not simply that of a defender protecting his empire. He became the aggressor, the architect of a counteroffensive designed to exploit Sidwell's psychological unraveling. Every time Sidwell moved to silence a threat, whether it was Judge Heran, a witness, or a rival, Sonny positioned himself to either block the strike or redirect it in a way that deepened Sidwell's paranoia. This was not just about winning. It was about breaking Sidwell from the inside, dismantling the confidence that had allowed him to operate with impunity. As the pressure mounted, Sidwell's influence began to fracture under its own weight. The new adjustment he had envisioned as his path to total control instead became the wedge that allowed Sonny to re-establish himself not only as a survivor but as a renewed force in Port Charles. The more Sidwell obsessed, the more Sonny's role evolved into something sharper, more dangerous, a role where he was no longer reacting to threats but dictating the terms of the conflict itself. In the end, Sidwell's truth was his undoing. The more he tried to push the city into alignment with his vision, the more he revealed the vulnerabilities in his own power. And in those moments of overreach, Sonny seized the momentum, stepping into a position where his authority was not just restored but amplified. Sidwell had wanted to control the narrative. Instead, he had written the story of his own downfall, a story where Sonny emerged with a stronger hand than ever before. And where the adjustment Sidwell had once thought was his greatest weapon became the very proof that he had lost control.